Listen closely. In the remote, unforgiving wilderness of Maine, for over 3 decades, 3 women operated what appeared, on the surface, to be a sanctuary of faith. 600 women, seeking solace, seeking healing, passed through their gates. Fewer than half ever returned to the world they knew, and those who did, they returned, changed. Not simply reformed, but fundamentally, disturbingly altered. The Maine State Archives, a place of hushed secrets and forgotten tragedies, contains testimony from one survivor. Her account was so profoundly unsettling, so utterly beyond the pale, that authorities, even a century ago, deemed it too dangerous to release. They locked it away, fearing the truth would shatter the fragile peace of their society. Tonight, we unearth that testimony. Tonight, we rip away the veil that has concealed the truth behind the cold stone walls of the Convent of Eternal Tears. Before we delve deeper into this abyss, understand this channel, this information, it is not for the faint of heart. It is not for the complacent. It is reserved only for the bravest souls, those who possess the raw courage to confront the darkest chapters of our shared history. If you are truly prepared to hear what transpired in the deepest shadows of our past, hit that subscribe button. Let us know in the comments from what state you are listening. Are you brave enough to join this community of truth seekers? Let's find out together just how deep this rabbit hole goes. What makes this particular story so chilling, so fundamentally disturbing, is that it wasn't born of religious fanaticism, nor was it the work of supernatural forces. No, the terror here sprang from something far more insidious, something far more terrifying, the calculated, meticulous pursuit of forbidden knowledge regardless of the human cost, all of it hidden cunningly behind a meticulously crafted facade of Christian charity, the very essence of manipulation veiled by benevolence. Consider the setting, the late 18th century. The District of Maine, then a mere extension of Massachusetts, was a brutal, untamed wilderness. Isolated communities clung to existence, battling unforgiving winters and even harsher realities. Millbridge, a small coastal town with a population barely scraping 300 souls, served as a precarious trading post. Lumber merchants, their hands calloused from the raw wood, and fishermen, their faces weathered by the relentless Atlantic, braved its treacherous waters. But 15 miles inland, through a dense, ancient forest marked only by the faint, nearly forgotten trails of Native American hunters, lay a specific parcel of land. A place destined to become synonymous with unspeakable horrors, a testament to the depths of human depravity when power is absolute. It was on a bleak, grey October morning in the year 1798 that the Ashford women arrived in Millbridge. Their horse-drawn wagon, heavy with mysterious, heavily crated cargo and an abundance of medical supplies, drew curious, wary glances from the townsfolk. Mother Superior Agatha Ashford, a figure of imposing grace, descended from the wagon with the undeniable bearing of European nobility. A striking woman in her early 40s, her dark auburn hair streaked with silver, her penetrating grey eyes seemed to instantly catalogue every detail of her surroundings, every subtle shift in the air. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the refined, cultured accent of educated English society. Her very manner suggested someone profoundly accustomed to wielding command, someone who expected and received absolute obedience. Her presence alone was a psychological instrument. Next emerged Sister Prudence Ashford, a stark contrast to Agatha, yet equally unsettling. She was tall, gaunt, perhaps 30 years of age, with skin the color of alabaster, almost translucent. Her hands, long and pale, moved with the precise, almost surgical grace of a master craftsman. An unusual steadiness resided in those fingers, a chilling precision that would later prove chillingly essential to the gruesome work that unfolded within the convent's walls. Unlike her superior, Prudence spoke little. She observed the world with pale blue eyes that revealed nothing, absolutely nothing, of her thoughts, like still pools hiding unknown depths. When she did break her silence, her voice held subtle traces of a Scottish accent, cultured and refined, yes, but laced with an underlying coldness. It was a coldness that made even the most hardened frontiersmen, men accustomed to the brutal realities of their existence, profoundly uncomfortable. And then the youngest of the trio, novice Temperance Ashford. She appeared to be barely past 22 years of age, possessing a haunting, ethereal beauty that instantly drew attention, a magnetic pull. Raven black hair framed a face of porcelain skin, and her dark eyes, deep as ancient wells, seemed to hold secrets centuries old. But there was something profoundly unsettling about her beauty, a quality that made mothers instinctively pull their children closer when she passed, a silent warning against an unseen danger. Her smile, a fleeting, almost practiced gesture, never reached her eyes, those windows to the soul remaining utterly devoid of warmth. And she had an unnerving, almost predatory habit of studying people, not as individuals but as specimens in a collection, as if dissecting them with her gaze. The Ashford women, with practiced ease, spun a compelling narrative. They claimed to be Anglican nuns, devout women fleeing to Rome. The oppressive grip of religious persecution in England, seeking sanctuary, seeking freedom to establish a new order in the wild, untamed American wilderness. They carried with them impressive letters of recommendation, official-looking documents bearing the seals of English church officials, attesting to their piety, their benevolent intentions, their noble mission. These documents, it would later be revealed, were masterful forgeries, crafted with an exquisite attention to detail, designed to deceive even the most astute observer. But their story, compelling as it was, proved more than sufficient to satisfy the earnest, deeply Protestant community of Millbridge. The townspeople, isolated and unsophisticated, viewed the unexpected presence of educated, seemingly devout religious women as a civilizing influence, a beacon of refinement in their rough-hewn frontier settlement. They welcomed them, seeing them as a blessing, unaware of the true darkness they were inviting into their midst. With gold coins that seemed inexhaustible, coins that flowed with an unnerving ease, the sisters purchased nearly 200 acres of remote forest land. The seller, a grateful widow, had struggled desperately to pay off her late husband's crushing debts. The price paid by the Ashford women, 3 times the land's assessed value, raised a few eyebrows. Yes, a ripple of quiet speculation, but it also ensured enthusiastic cooperation from the local authorities. Gold, you see, has a way of silencing questions, of smoothing over rough edges, of buying complicity. Immediately, with an almost frantic urgency, the sisters began to lay the groundwork for their true enterprise. They hired every available carpenter, every mason, every laborer in the entire region, pouring their seemingly inexhaustible wealth into the project. The edifice that began to rise from the dense wilderness over the following 8 months was unlike any religious structure the workers had ever encountered. It was 3 stories of grim, grey stone, quarried from the jagged coast nearby. Its walls were impossibly thick, designed not for sanctity but for containment, thick enough to muffle, to utterly silence, any sound from within, any cry, any scream. The windows were unusually small, like narrow slits, and positioned unnervingly high on the walls, making it impossible to glimpse anything inside from ground level, denying any casual observer a view. But the most peculiar, the most chilling aspect of the construction was the basement level. It required extensive excavation, far beyond what any typical cellar would demand, and reinforced foundations, massive and unyielding, far exceeding the needs for simple storage. When questioned about the unusual, almost fortress-like architecture, Mother Superior Agatha, with a serene smile that never quite reached her eyes, explained with an air of practiced piety, "Penitence," she intoned, her voice soft but firm, "requires solitude, and solitude, my dear sirs, requires proper containment. Our sisters in England," she continued, fabricating a convenient truth, "have learned that spiritual healing is most effective when the penitent is completely removed from worldly distractions." The explanation, delivered with such confident grace, satisfied most of the listeners, men whose simple lives offered no parallel for such elaborate deceptions. Yet even among the laborers, a flicker of unease, a quiet whisper of doubt, Perez insisted. Some of the older, more experienced workers, men who had seen their share of strange sights on the frontier, privately wondered why a house of God, a sanctuary of peace, needed to look so much like a fortress, a prison, a subtle, unsettling incongruity that they couldn't quite articulate but felt deep in their bones. The Ashford women, with an almost obsessive meticulousness, supervised every single detail of the construction. They insisted on specific modifications that seemed utterly bizarre to the builders. Reinforced doors, impossibly heavy, secured with multiple formidable locks. Drainage systems, elaborate and robust, designed to handle immense volumes of liquid, far beyond what any normal convent would ever require. and ventilation shafts wide and deep that seemed more appropriate for a medical facility, a laboratory, than a place of quiet contemplation and prayer. When the bewildered workers, their faces etched with confusion, dared to inquire about these strange features, the sisters, always composed, always in control, cited their extensive experience. They spoke of similar religious institutions in Europe, claiming these were simply standard accommodations for intensive spiritual counseling. Each explanation was delivered with such unshakable conviction, such an air of authority, that further questioning seemed almost impertinent, even sacrilegious. The seeds of their operation were being sown carefully, precisely, under the very noses of those who built its walls. Dr. Samuel Hartwell, the circuit physician, a man of science who journeyed tirelessly between the scattered frontier settlements, became one of the sisters' earliest and most tragically enthusiastic supporters. A man in his 50s, known for his progressive, even radical medical thinking, Dr. Hartwell was instantly, utterly impressed by the sisters' apparent, almost preternatural knowledge of feminine psychology and the intricacies of mental disorders. During their very first meeting, he found himself amazed, almost awestruck, by their sophisticated understanding of conditions that most physicians of his era barely recognized, let alone understood. The sisters, he recorded meticulously in his journal, his words betraying his deep admiration, possess remarkable insight into the nature of feminine hysteria and melancholia. Their methods, while undeniably unconventional, are, I fear, decades ahead of current American practice. They speak of techniques for addressing the root causes of mental disturbance rather than merely treating symptoms. He was captivated, intellectually seduced by their apparent brilliance, their seemingly advanced understanding of the human mind. What Dr. Hartwell, in his professional naivete, failed to record in his official, publicly accessible journal was the far more significant, far more revealing private conversation he had with Mother Superior Agatha. It was a conversation about the financial arrangements, the true bedrock of their burgeoning collaboration. In exchange for referring difficult cases to the convent, those women deemed beyond the scope of conventional medicine, and for discreetly providing medical supplies through his established connections, Dr. Hartwell would receive a substantial ongoing monthly payment, a sum that for a frontier physician struggling to make a living was nothing short of a fortune. But the lieu, we went deeper than mere money. He was also granted unprecedented access to detailed case studies, meticulous records of the patients and their treatments. These, he was told, held the key to advancing his own medical career, to unlocking new frontiers of understanding. For a man of science, an offer of such invaluable data combined with financial security was simply too compelling, too valuable to refuse. He believed he was contributing to progress, unaware he was facilitating monstrous experiments. And so, the convent's sinister reputation began to spread, not through fear, but through calculated whispers of miraculous transformations. It moved with remarkable speed throughout the territory, like a carefully cultivated pathogen. Families from settlements as far as Portsmouth, Portland, and even the sophisticated parlors of Boston began to hear hushed recommendations, tales of the Ashford sisters' seemingly miraculous ability to transform troublesome women into model citizens. The cost was steep, undeniably so. $20 silver for a month's treatment, 50 for 3 months, and 100 for what they chillingly termed complete reformation. A small fortune in those times. But for desperate families, families burdened by scandalous daughters, by wives prone to hysteria, by women who simply refused to conform, it seemed a small price to pay. A negligible sum for the promise of peace, for the restoration of respectability, for the erasure of inconvenient truths. The types of women dispatched to the Convent of Eternal Tears were a stark, chilling reflection of the profound social anxieties, the rigid societal norms of early 19th century America. Unmarried mothers, defiant in their refusal to betray their lovers' identities, arrived alongside wives who had dared to publicly challenge their husbands' patriarchal authority. Daughters who vehemently rejected arranged marriages, daring to assert their own will, were delivered to the same grim institution that received women who had shown too much interest in books, too much interest in politics, too much intellect for their supposed station. The common binding thread among all these unfortunate souls was defiance. These were women who had in some way dared to step outside the narrow, suffocating boundaries of acceptable feminine behavior, women who refused to be neatly categorized and controlled. Religious tensions of the era also played a cynical, manipulative role in the convent's ever-growing clientele. Staunch Puritan families occasionally sent daughters who had shown even a nascent interest in Anglican or Methodist teachings, viewing it as a corruption of their souls. Conversely, devout Anglican families, equally rigid in their beliefs, disposed of daughters who found themselves drawn to the emotional fervor, the raw passion of Baptist revival meetings. The Ashford sisters, with an almost predatory impartiality, accepted all denominations, all afflictions with equal unsettling enthusiasm. They claimed their methods transcended sectarian differences, operating, they insisted, through the universal purifying power of Christian discipline. A carefully constructed facade, designed to appeal to the deeply ingrained religious sensibilities of the era, masking a far more insidious agenda. The first, undeniable indication that something was fundamentally, horrifically wrong within the silent stone walls of the Convent of Eternal Tears came on a bitter February night in 1803. Young Thomas Brewster, a robust and skilled hunter, was traversing the frozen, snow-laden forest that surrounded the mysterious institution. The 20-year-old trapper had been tracking a wounded deer for hours, his focus singular, his senses honed by the wilderness. But then, through the biting wind and the heavy silence of the winter night, unusual, deeply disturbing sounds pierced the air, drawing his attention irresistibly toward the grim stone building that loomed dark, almost malevolent against the pale winter sky. Thomas had grown up in these woods. Every crack of a branch, every whisper of the wind, every distant howl of a wolf was intimately known to him. He knew every natural sound, every subtle shift in the forest's symphony. But what he heard that night, what clawed its way through the snow-heavy air, was different. It was deeply, profoundly wrong, and it was unmistakably human, a screaming that rose and fell in horrifying waves, sometimes dying down to desperate, choked whimpers, before exploding again into raw, primal shrieks of agony that made his very blood freeze in his veins, chilling him to the bone. Abandoning his wounded prey, abandoning all sense of self-preservation, Thomas, driven by an instinctive primal dread, crept closer to the convent. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic drum in the frigid night, as the terrible, inhuman sounds continued their relentless assault. The building from the outside appeared utterly dark, a monolith of silence and shadows, but as he cautiously circled toward the rear, a faint flickering glow caught his eye, emanating from basement windows that were partially obscured by heavy snowdrifts. The screaming, a torrent of pure, unadulterated terror, grew louder, more distinct, as he approached. And with it, other sounds began to emerge from the darkness, the chilling clink of metal instruments, sharp and precise, urgent, whispered conversations, low and conspiratorial. And then, something that sounded disturbingly, horrifyingly like sawing. Thomas, driven by an unbearable compulsion, peered through a partially frosted basement window. What he glimpsed in that agonizing moment, what burned itself into his memory, would haunt him for the rest of his life. The basement, a space meant for storage for mundane convent affairs, had been transformed into what could only be described as a surgical theater. It was brilliantly, starkly illuminated by dozens of oil lamps and candles, their frantic flames casting dancing, monstrous shadows on the cold, unforgiving stone walls. A woman, her body racked with torment, was secured to a wooden table with thick, brutal leather restraints, her head held absolutely immobile by a grotesque metal apparatus that looked less like medical equipment and more like an instrument of torture. Sister Prudence, her usually pale face flushed with an unnerving, almost ecstatic concentration, stood over the restrained woman, manipulating what appeared to be a long, thin metal rod. The patient's head was partially shaved, revealing a stark, pale scalp marked with dark, precise lines drawn in ink. Most horrifying of all, most utterly soul-shattering, was the undeniable, sickening truth. There was clearly an opening in the woman's skull. Thomas could see the gleam of exposed bone and something darker underneath. Something that he, with dawning, sick horror, realized was living brain tissue. The screaming woman's eyes were wide, dilated with terror and excruciating pain. But what made the scene even more nightmarish, more profoundly disturbing, was the clinical detachment, the cold, unfeeling professionalism of her tormentors. Mother Superior. Agatha stood nearby, a figure of chilling composure, a notebook clutched in her hand, calmly recording observations. She was documenting the procedure as if it were a routine medical examination, a mundane scientific experiment utterly devoid of empathy or human feeling. Novice Temperance, her beautiful face a mask of chilling efficiency, held additional instruments, passing them to Sister Prudence with the practiced, almost mechanical precision of an experienced surgical assistant. Thomas watched, frozen in a silent, suffocating horror, as Sister Prudence, with an unnerving, deliberate motion, inserted the metal rod deeper into the woman's exposed skull. The screaming, already a crescendo of unimaginable agony, reached a peak, a raw, primal shriek that seemed to shake the very stones of the building, a sound that would forever echo in Thomas's mind. Then, suddenly, terrifyingly, it cut off. The patient's body convulsed once, a final desperate tremor, then went utterly slack. She had lost consciousness, slipping into merciful oblivion. Yet the sisters continued their work, their movements methodical, precise, apparently untroubled by the fact that their patient was no longer responsive to their ministrations, no longer capable of feeling, of screaming. They were simply continuing. Unable to witness any more, unable to bear the weight of such unspeakable depravity, Thomas fled into the night. He stumbled blindly through the deep snowdrifts, propelled by a raw, unadulterated panic, the frigid air burning his lungs. The image of that basement chamber, that infernal operating theatre, was burned irrevocably into his memory. The casual, almost mundane efficiency of the procedures, the scientific detachment of the perpetrators, and most terrifying of all, the sickening, dawning realization that this was clearly not the first time such horrors had occurred. Within those cold, unyielding stone walls, this was a practiced, refined evil. When Thomas, battered and wild-eyed, finally reached town the next morning, he burst into his father's blacksmith shop, a man undone. He babbled incoherently about torture chambers, about brain surgery, his words tumbling out in a frantic, disjointed torrent. His intensity was so raw, so utterly unhinged, that his father, a practical man, a man of the earth, feared the boy had suffered a complete mental breakdown, lost his mind to the wilderness. The elder Brewster, a man who valued community stability and reputation above all else, listened with growing alarm as his son described scenes that seemed to belong not in their quiet, God-fearing frontier settlement, but in the darkest, most Gothic novels. "Thomas," his father said carefully, his voice laced with concern, a desperate attempt to ground his son in reality. "You were hunting alone in a blizzard, in the dark, after tracking a wounded animal for hours. The mind can play terrible tricks under such circumstances. Perhaps what you saw was a medical procedure of some kind. The sisters are known to treat various feminine ailments that require intimate intervention." He grasped at any rational explanation, any alternative to the horrifying truth his son was presenting. But Thomas's description, despite his fractured state, was too detailed, too specific, too chillingly accurate to be dismissed as mere hallucination or misunderstanding. He could describe the exact layout of the basement chamber, the specific grotesque instruments he had observed, the chillingly precise movements of Sister Prudence, and most convincingly, most damningly, he articulated the clinical, almost detached manner in which the procedures were being conducted. This, he insisted, was not the random, chaotic violence of madness. This was something far more sinister, far more deliberate, systematic, methodical, and clearly, terrifyingly practiced. The elder Brewster, despite his initial skepticism, knew his son. He knew the boy's honesty, his grounded nature, and what Thomas described was too profoundly disturbing to ignore. He decided cautiously to consult with Deacon Morrison, the town's most respected citizen, the unofficial moral authority, the man whose judgment was sought in all matters of grave importance. Morrison was a cautious man, a man who had meticulously built his reputation on careful, considered judgment and the unwavering pursuit of community harmony. The Ashford sisters, after all, had been model citizens for 5 years. 5 years of unwavering contribution to local charities. 5 years of maintaining perfect, unblemished decorum in their rare public appearances. They were pillars of the community, or so it seemed. More importantly, and this was the critical weight on Deacon Morrison's mind, several prominent families currently had daughters and wives receiving treatment at the convent. Accusations, if proven false, could destroy not only the sisters' reputations but also the fragile peace and respectability of these influential families. "We must be extremely careful," Deacon Morrison warned, his brow furrowed with concern after hearing Thomas's harrowing account. "Accusations of this nature could destroy reputations and tear our community apart. These are respected women of God, not common criminals. There must be a reasonable explanation for what the boy thinks he saw." His pragmatism warred with his growing unease. However, despite his inherent caution, the deacon was too responsible, too deeply committed to the well-being of his community to entirely ignore such grave allegations. The sheer weight of Thomas's conviction, the visceral terror in the boy's eyes, demanded action, however discreet. He agreed to make a quiet, unobtrusive inquiry, a reconnaissance mission under the guise of piety. He would visit the convent the following week under the pretense of discussing a church fundraising event, an innocuous, community-minded reason that would necessitate the sisters' participation. Mother Superior Agatha, a master of deception, received him in the convent's austere parlor. It was a sparsely furnished room, devoid of warmth or comfort, dominated by a massive wooden crucifix that loomed over the space, and religious paintings whose painted eyes seemed to watch visitors with silent, unblinking judgment. Her manner, as always, was impeccably gracious, flawlessly composed, showing not the slightest tremor of anxiety, not the faintest flicker of guilt. She served tea, steaming and fragrant, and inquired about his family's health with an air of genuine concern, a performance perfected through years of manipulation. When Deacon Morrison, with carefully chosen words, delicately mentioned that local hunters had reported unusual noises coming from the convent at night, Mother Superior Agatha's expression registered only mild concern, a practiced understanding. "Deacon Morrison," she said, her cultured English accent a soothing balm, "we often conduct intensive prayer sessions for our most troubled residents during the quiet hours of night. The process of spiritual cleansing, you see, can be quite vocal, particularly for women who have lived lives of sin and moral corruption." She spoke of demons, of possession, of the desperate struggle of fallen souls against divine purification. She explained, her voice imbued with a sympathetic sadness, that many of their patients arrived in states of severe spiritual distress, afflicted, she claimed, by the insidious grasp of demons, demons of pride, of lust, of rebellion, demons that fought desperately against the purifying power of Christian discipline. "Some women," she continued, her gaze direct and unblinking, "have allowed evil to take such deep root in their souls that the process of extraction requires considerable effort. The sounds your hunters heard were likely the cries of demons being cast out through the power of prayer and penance." The explanation was delivered with such unshakable sincerity, such theological sophistication, such an air of unassailable spiritual authority, that Deacon Morrison, a man deeply rooted in his faith, found himself nodding in reluctant agreement. The concept of spiritual warfare, of the constant battle against unseen evil, was deeply familiar, intrinsically woven into the fabric of all frontier Christian communities. And the idea that particularly corrupted souls might require extreme, even violent measures for their salvation was, within the prevailing religious context of the era, not unreasonable. It aligned with his worldview, and Mother Superior Agatha knew it. She then offered, with a gesture of benevolent generosity, to show him through the upper levels of the convent, leading him through Spartan but impeccably clean dormitory rooms where several women sat in silent, almost eerily still contemplation. The residents appeared calm, deeply absorbed in prayer or meditation, their faces serene masks of piety. But Deacon Morrison, his senses subtly sharpened by Thomas's horrifying account, noticed a disturbing detail. They seemed unusually subdued, moving with a mechanical precision, a stark uniformity rather than the natural, unpredictable spontaneity of us human beings. They were too perfect. When he attempted to make eye contact with them, to offer a polite nod, a small reassuring smile, they seemed to look through him, their gazes unfocused, distant, as if their attention was riveted on something invisible, something far away, deep within themselves, or perhaps nothing at all. They were present in body, but absent in spirit. When the deacon, pushing his cautious inquiry, asked about visiting the basement levels, the very heart of Thomas's terrifying revelation, Mother Superior Agatha, with a modest, knowing smile, smoothly explained that those chambers served as the convent's intensive spiritual counseling facilities, reserved for women requiring the most focused, most profound attention. "I'm afraid," she demurred, her voice soft but firm, "it would be inappropriate for a man to witness such intimate procedures. Some of our treatments for feminine spiritual corruption, you see, require private examination of the soul that would compromise the patient's dignity if observed by male eyes." The explanation, perfectly crafted, perfectly delivered, seemed entirely reasonable within the strict social conventions of the time, the rigid expectations of female modesty and privacy, and so Deacon Morrison, a man of his era, left the convent feeling reassured, his anxieties seemingly quelled. He concluded that Thomas Brewster, poor boy, had indeed misinterpreted what he had witnessed, his mind playing tricks in the dark, in the cold. But something, a subtle, persistent wrongness, continued to trouble him during the long ride home. A vague, indefinable sense of unease that he couldn't quite identify, but couldn't shake from his thoughts. The women he had observed, so calm, so controlled, moved with an unnatural uniformity, a synchronized stillness that reminded him more of sleepwalkers, of automatons than conscious feeling human beings. And there had been a smell, a faint, almost imperceptible odor throughout the entire building, a pervasive scent that he couldn't quite place. Not just the expected aroma of old wood and beeswax, of cleaning solutions and medicinal herbs. No. Something else lingered underneath, something darker, something profoundly unsettling. It was a smell that reminded him, with a sudden horrifying jolt, of the battlefield hospitals he had visited during the Revolutionary War, places where the stench of blood and suffering had been so thick, so pervasive, that it seemed to coat the inside of his throat, clinging to him long after he left. The smell of decay, of human misery, subtly masked but undeniably present. Following Deacon Morrison's carefully orchestrated visit, the Ashford sisters, ever cunning, ever watchful, implemented additional security measures, tightening their iron grip, making their operations even more secretive, even more impregnable to outside scrutiny. The loud, agonizing screaming that had first alerted young Thomas Brewster to the horrors within was replaced by an eerie, profound silence. A silence that paradoxically seemed far more ominous, far more unsettling than the previous nocturnal disturbances. It was the silence of complete control, the silence of suppressed pain. Local families, still unaware of the monstrous truth, continued sending their troubled women to the convent, blinded by desperation, by the promise of societal conformity, and the sisters, with their ever-present serene smiles, continued accepting them, their arms seemingly open, their promises of transformation growing increasingly sophisticated, increasingly tempting. They offered hope, but delivered oblivion. However, observant residents, those few with a keen eye for subtle shifts, for the uncanny, began to notice disturbing patterns that suggested something was fundamentally horrifically wrong with the treatments being administered behind those impenetrable stone walls. Women who entered the convent seeking spiritual correction, women who were deemed rebellious, independent, or simply too spirited for their time, often emerged months later as completely different people, not reformed, not redeemed as the sisters claimed, but somehow fundamentally altered, changed in ways that defied all logical explanation, all natural human variation. Mary Prescott, a vibrant, spirited young woman of 19, was known throughout Millbridge for her quick wit, her infectious, booming laughter, and a stubborn, unyielding independence that had scandalized her family by prompting her to refuse no less than 3 marriage proposals from perfectly suitable young men. Her parents, mortified by her public displays of willfulness, by her refusal to conform to societal expectations, had finally, in a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation and their own, sent her to the convent for 6 months of spiritual guidance, a rigorous program designed, they hoped, to prepare her for a proper, submissive married life. When Mary returned home, her parents, in their initial relief, were absolutely delighted by the transformation. Gone was the rebellious, outspoken daughter who had argued about everything from mundane household duties to complex religious doctrine, a constant source of friction. In her place, they found a docile, blank-eyed woman who spoke only when directly addressed, her voice flat, devoid of inflection. She never expressed personal opinions, never voiced desires, never displayed any spark of independent thought. She simply complied. She accepted the very first marriage proposal that came her way, a suitor chosen by her parents with mechanical compliance, showing no emotion, no preference, no personal investment whatsoever in the match. But as the weeks, then months passed, Mary's parents, their initial delight slowly eroding, grew increasingly, profoundly concerned about their daughter's condition. The lack of emotion, the utter absence of personality, was becoming terrifyingly apparent. She displayed no recognition of favorite foods, no spark of joy or nostalgia for cherished possessions, no flicker of memory for childhood friends. When shown letters she had meticulously written before her treatment, letters filled with her characteristic wit and fierce independence, she stared at them without comprehension, as if looking at documents penned by a complete stranger, a ghost of her former self. Most disturbing of all, most utterly soul-crushing, she showed no emotional reaction to anything. Neither joy nor sorrow, pleasure nor pain seemed to register in her consciousness. She was a hollowed-out shell, an automaton in human form. Dr. Hartwell, when consulted about Mary's chilling condition, astonishingly praised the sister's work as a complete, unqualified success. The patient, he declared confidently, utterly oblivious to the horror he was endorsing, has been cured of the mental defects that made her unsuitable for marriage and motherhood. The rebellious spirit that caused her family such distress, he continued with a chilling medical detachment, has been completely eliminated through proper spiritual discipline, a triumph of their methods. He saw only what he wanted to see, the confirmation of his own intellectual biases, the validation of a system he was invested in. However, Mary's mother, blessed with a mother's instinct with a deeper, more primal connection to her daughter, noticed disturbing details that troubled her deeply, details that Dr. Hartwell, in his clinical detachment, either ignored or simply failed to perceive. Her daughter bore unusual scars on her scalp, partially hidden by her thick raven hair, but undeniably visible during washing and brushing. The scars formed a distinct, unnerving pattern, a precise geometry that suggested some kind of deliberate, invasive procedure rather than accidental injury. When questioned about them, Mary showed no memory, no flicker of recognition of how they had been acquired, staring blankly. She simply stated in her flat, affectless voice that she remembered nothing about her time at the convent except praying very hard to become a better woman. The horror of that statement, the utter erasure of her past, was a crushing weight on her mother's soul. Similar, equally terrifying transformations occurred with increasing, alarming frequency as the convent's sinister reputation, cloaked in false piety, spread throughout New England. Hannah Morse, a young woman sent for treatment of profound melancholia following the crushing death of her infant son, returned home after 3 months as an unnaturally, sickeningly cheerful woman. She claimed to have no memory whatsoever of ever having a child. When shown the baby's clothing, the tiny, lovingly crafted toys, she displayed no recognition, no emotional response, no flicker of maternal grief. It was as if that entire chapter of her life, that profound human experience of motherhood and loss, had been completely, utterly erased from her memory, wiped clean by some unseen, monstrous hand. Elizabeth Thornton's case, however, was perhaps the most unsettling. You see the pattern, don't you? This isn't just a story, it's a blueprint, a chilling demonstration of how easily, how systematically human beings can be reprogrammed, stripped of their individuality, their autonomy, their very essence. The Ashford women, operating under the guise of spiritual enlightenment, were perfecting a form of psychological and neurological control centuries ahead of its time. They weren't just treating hysteria, they were eliminating dissent. They were crafting obedience. Every woman who entered those doors, spirited or subdued, became a subject in a grand, horrific experiment. The scars on Mary Prescott's scalp, the erased memories of Hannah Morse, these weren't side effects. They were the intended outcomes. This is the forbidden history they don't want you to know, that the human mind, your mind, is a battlefield. And there are forces, ancient and calculating, that understand its vulnerabilities better than you ever could. They exploit your desires, your fears, your need for belonging. They offer you a sense of peace, a path to self-improvement, but what they deliver is submission. They promise truth, but offer a carefully constructed reality. The Convent of Eternal Tears was a microcosm, a brutal prototype, for systems of control that operate on a far grander scale, even today. Think about it. How many voices have been silenced? How many truths have been suppressed? How many individuals have been subtly, systemically altered, their unique spirit dulled, their capacity for critical thought eroded, all under the guise of progress, wellness, or stability? This isn't just about a quaint historical horror story. This is about awakening. Are you ready to question everything you've been told? Are you prepared to confront the possibility that the very fabric of your perceived reality has been woven by unseen hands? The sisters weren't serpents, imply acting on a whim. Their methods, their chilling precision, spoke of a deeper, more sophisticated knowledge, a knowledge not of medicine, as Dr. Hartwell naively believed, but of neurological pathways, of the very architecture of consciousness. They understood how to sever connections, how to create voids in memory, how to reshape personality, not through gentle persuasion, but through brutal, invasive means. This wasn't about faith, it was about power. Absolute power over the mind, the ultimate frontier of control. Their motives, too, were more complex than mere financial gain or misguided religious zeal. They were driven by a hunger for control, yes, but also by a desire to prove a radical hypothesis, that human will, the very essence of defiance and individuality, could be systematically eradicated, that a perfect, obedient human could be engineered, and the desperate families seeking relief from troublesome women were unwitting accomplices, sacrificing their daughters' minds on the altar of social conformity. Every woman who entered the convent, regardless of her initial temperament, posed a challenge, a problem to be solved, a mind to be mastered. They were not seen as individuals, but as variables in a macabre equation. This isn't just about historical oppression, it's about a chilling precursor to modern psychological operations, to subtle manipulations of information and perception. They mastered the art of concealing monstrous acts behind benevolent facades. They understood that the most effective control is not brute force, but the subtle alteration of identity, the quiet erasure of inconvenient truths. Think about the silence after the screams. That wasn't merely a security measure, it was a sign of success. It meant the process was complete. It meant the will was broken. The mind, once a vibrant landscape of thought and emotion, had been rendered docile, pliable, empty of the inconvenient complexities that made a woman troublesome. They had achieved a state of perfect, unthinking obedience. This is the chilling reality of hidden agendas. They don't always operate with overt force. Sometimes the most insidious control is exerted through the promise of peace, of conformity, of belonging. They offer you a solution to your internal turmoil, to your anxieties about the world, and in exchange they quietly, meticulously reshape who you are, what you believe, what you remember. The Ashford family wasn't just performing lobotomies in a remote convent. They were demonstrating the ultimate power dynamic, the ability to define reality for others, to decide who is normal, who is troublesome, and how those deemed troublesome should be fixed. This knowledge, this understanding of fundamental manipulation, has echoed through history, evolving, adapting, becoming more sophisticated, more invisible. The more you understand how the human mind can be systematically controlled, the more you can recognize the subtle currents of manipulation that flow through every aspect of modern life. This is the first step in reclaiming your own mind, your own will. Now, let's go deeper. The fact that the sisters were able to operate for so long, undetected by the wider world, speaks volumes about the societal blind spots of the era. They exploited the pervasive fear of female hysteria, the societal imperative for women to be compliant and submissive. They provided a convenient, seemingly benevolent solution to families struggling with daughters who dared to think, to feel, to exist outside predefined roles. This wasn't just about what happened inside the convent, it was about the societal conditions that allowed it to thrive. The willingness of a community to turn a blind eye, to believe what was convenient rather than what was true. This is the critical lesson. Hidden agendas flourish in environments where questioning is discouraged, where conformity is prioritized, and where a comforting lie is preferred over an uncomfortable truth. They leveraged existing power structures, exploited societal anxieties, and manipulated belief systems to create their own isolated kingdom of control. The very fabric of their deception was woven from the threads of common prejudices and fears. This is the pattern of control throughout history. Identify a societal pain point, offer a seemingly legitimate solution, and then quietly, insidiously expand your influence, transforming benevolence into absolute power. It's a recurring motif in the annals of dark history, a lesson in how easily societies can be steered by those who understand the levers of human fear and desire. The psychological control systems at play here were far more advanced than simple coercion. They were about the systematic dismantling of identity. The women who emerged were not just obedient, they were stripped of their core selves, their memories, their very capacity for original thought. This is the ultimate aim of any control system, not just to dictate actions, but to dictate consciousness itself, to erase the individual and replace it with a compliant shell. Think about the implications. If a person's identity, their very essence, can be surgically altered, what does that say about the fragility of the self? What does that say about the hidden forces that seek to define you, to mold you, to tell you who you are, what you should believe, what you should remember? This is not just a historical anomaly. It is a dark mirror reflecting back the subtle, pervasive manipulations that exist even in our modern, seemingly enlightened age. The goal remains the same: to manage dissent, to control narratives, to ensure conformity. The methods have simply become more sophisticated, less overtly violent, more psychologically subtle. They don't need a basement surgical theater when they have the tools of mass communication, the algorithms that shape your thoughts, the narratives that define your reality. This is why you must awaken your awareness. The suppressed truths of the Ashford family's legacy extend beyond the individual victims. They hint at ancient corruption, at institutional manipulation that runs deeper than any single convent, any single doctor. Dr. Hartwell, a man of science, was complicit, not merely through his direct actions, but through his intellectual arrogance and his susceptibility to financial incentives. He was a pawn, albeit a willing one, in a much larger game. This is the insidious nature of ancient corruption. It infects institutions, twists their stated missions, and subverts their purpose for darker ends. It operates by identifying points of leverage, individuals with influence, and then carefully, subtly drawing them into its web. They don't overtly declare their true intentions. They cloak them in the language of progress, of public good, of scientific advancement. The promise of elite knowledge, of groundbreaking discoveries, can be a powerful lure for ambitious minds. This is how hidden agendas infiltrate the very structures designed to protect us. The Ashford convent wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a deeper malaise, a manifestation of a pervasive underlying darkness in the fabric of society. A darkness that understands how to leverage human desires for knowledge, for wealth, for power, to its own sinister ends. The chilling efficiency of the Ashford sisters speaks of a lineage, a hidden tradition of forbidden knowledge. This wasn't something they invented overnight. It was refined, passed down, meticulously guarded. This is the nature of ancient corruption. It persists through generations, adapting, evolving, but retaining its core intent. It manifests in various forms, in different eras, but the underlying drive for control remains constant. Think of the psychological impact of such knowledge, the ability to re-engineer human consciousness. This is power on a scale that few truly comprehend. It's the power to shape society not through brute force, but through the systematic cultivation of obedience. It's the ultimate form of self-mastery, but applied in reverse. Mastery over others, achieved by shattering their internal world. The spiritual cleansing was a cover story. The actual process was a profound act of psychological warfare, an assault on the very soul. And the silence that followed, the absence of rebellion, the docile compliance, that was their ultimate victory. It's a stark reminder that the most dangerous battles are often fought not on battlefields, but within the confines of the mind. This descent into the Ashford family's dark legacy is designed to awaken you, to shift your perception of reality. The information you are receiving is not just historical anecdote, it's a code, a cipher for understanding the hidden mechanisms of control that operate around you right now. The suppression of this truth, the deliberate burying of the survivor's testimony, speaks volumes. It reveals a deep-seated fear on the part of those in power. The fear that if men understood the true nature of manipulation, if they recognized how easily their minds could be re-engineered, the entire edifice of control might crumble. They want you compliant, predictable, and unaware of your own immense capacity for independent thought and action. This is about reclaiming your sovereignty. This is about recognizing the strings before they pull you. Every segment of this script is a key, unlocking a deeper understanding of how the world truly operates beyond the curated narratives and comforting illusions. You are not just a viewer, you are an initiate. The rabbit hole goes deeper than you can imagine, but the light of truth illuminates the path forward. The Ashford family's Chronicle of Malevolence serves as a stark warning. Never underestimate the cunning of those who seek to dominate, nor the sophistication of their methods. They don't need obvious chains when they can construct mental prisons. They don't need overt censorship when they can subtly shape your desires and beliefs. The lessons from the Convent of Eternal Tears are not confined to the 18th century. They are timeless, universal principles of control, constantly evolving, constantly adapting to new technologies and new societal structures. The target remains the same: the human mind, your perception, your will. This is a game of information, of narrative, of subtle psychological warfare waged on the battlefield of consciousness. The men who obsess over secrets, hidden forces, self-mastery, and elite knowledge understand this truth intuitively. You are now being given a glimpse behind the curtain, a piece of that elite knowledge, not to wield power over others, but to reclaim your own. This is about true self-mastery, the mastery of your own mind, free from external manipulation. This is about seeing the invisible architecture of control. This deep dive into the Ashford family isn't just about uncovering historical atrocities. It's about recognizing the psychological control systems that still operate today, albeit in more subtle, insidious forms. The techniques may have evolved from scalpels to screens, from physical restraints to digital algorithms, but the fundamental objective remains the same: to manage populations, to suppress independent thought, to cultivate conformity. The men obsessed with secrets and hidden forces grasp this intuitively. They understand that true power lies not in overt displays of force, but in the unseen manipulation of perception and belief. The forbidden history we're unearthing tonight is a primer, a foundational text for understanding the architecture of control. It demonstrates how easily, how systematically individuals and entire societies can be steered by those who master the subtle art of psychological engineering. This is why you are here, to recognize the patterns, to decode the signals, to discern the truth from the meticulously crafted illusion. This knowledge changes a man forever. It forces him to question everything he's been told, everything he thought he knew. It's a burden, yes, but also a liberation. The awakening is undeniable. Consider the depths of ancient corruption, passed down through generations, hidden in plain sight. The Ashford sisters were not isolated anomalies. They were a manifestation of a deeper, more pervasive network of individuals who understood and exploited the hidden levers of human behavior. This is the elite knowledge you seek, the understanding that power is often exercised through the manipulation of consciousness itself, not through brute force, but through the subtle re-engineering of the human mind, its desires, its fears, its very capacity for independent thought. The institutional manipulation we've uncovered, the complicity of figures like Dr. Hartwell and Deacon Morrison, illustrates how easily established systems can be subverted when greed, ambition, or comfortable ignorance prevail. This is a battle for your mind, for your perception, for your very identity. Are you still listening? Are you truly willing to accept the weight of this truth? Because once you hear it, once you truly understand, there is no going back. The veil has been lifted. The macabre history of the Ashford family is not just a tale. It is a profound lesson in the true nature of power. The descent continues, deeper into the forbidden. You have now witnessed the chilling blueprint for psychological control, disguised as piety, executed with ruthless precision. The Ashford family's dark legacy is not merely a historical footnote, it is a living, breathing testament to the enduring presence of hidden agendas and suppressed truths. The question is no longer if such manipulations exist, but where and how they manifest in your own life. This knowledge, once embraced, demands a transformation. It demands vigilance, critical thought, and an unwavering commitment to truth, no matter how uncomfortable. The awakening is irreversible. You have seen the hidden forces at play, the meticulous architecture of control. This is the truth that changes a man forever. Embrace it, integrate it, and let it fuel your pursuit of genuine self-mastery. The journey has just begun. What part of this chilling chronicle resonated most deeply with your own understanding of hidden power? Comment below with the phrase "awaken the mind" to acknowledge your journey. If you truly grasp the gravity of this revelation, if you feel the shift within your own consciousness, affirm your commitment. Comment "awaken the mind" to lock in your identity transformation and join the ranks of those who truly see.